Well, everyone, there's a new tariff in town. As pretty much everyone's aware, last week President Trump announced 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico. He also announced a 10% tariff increase on China. Now, both Canada and Mexico negotiated a 30-day pause on the timeline for implementation of the tariffs, but China went the other direction and declared tariffs on American goods, potentially starting a trade war. For Canada and Mexico, a 25% tariff could be devastating. About 75% of Canada's exports come to the United States, and for Mexico, it's about 80%. So a 25% tariff would likely push both of those economies into a recession. China's in a different position. Only about 15% of China's exports come to the US. So for China, although the 10% tariff increase could create economic challenges, the risks aren't as significant. And while Canada and Mexico have pushed back on the timeline, the tariff negotiations are far from done. We'll likely be revisiting the Canada and Mexico tariff conversation soon. So, what would tariffs like these mean for the US economy? First, it would negatively impact economic growth. The blue chip economists currently forecast 2.2% growth in 2025, and tariffs would reduce that growth to somewhere between 0.7% growth to 1.8% growth if they were implemented at the rates put on the table last week. In addition, economists believe tariffs would increase inflation by about 0.5%, so that would take inflation back up to the low to mid 3% range. And that would put pressure on the Federal Reserve to hold rates higher. The Fed probably wouldn't raise the overnight rate, but they probably wouldn't lower rates either. I've also seen prognostication that the 10-year Treasury could go up by as much as 50 basis points, and that would certainly impact commercial real estate lending. Aside from the potentially higher interest rates, the direct impact on commercial real estate would be limited. For office, the effects would be nominal. Warehouse space demand could be reduced over the long run if consumption declines. That would reflect reduced spending on imported products. About 75% of the toys and games purchased by Americans come from China. 37% of the footwear, 29% of the furniture, 27% of electronics, and 22% of the clothing also come from China. And that's where you'd also see the effects on retail real estate. It would be indirect. Tariffs may weigh on some types of retail sales and perhaps cause some challenges for specific individual retailers, but the impact on retail real estate itself would likely be limited. The one commercial real estate sector that would likely be most affected is multifamily housing. And from an owner's standpoint, the effect of tariffs could be viewed as a positive. Basically, tariffs would increase construction costs. 31% of the softwood lumber used in construction is imported, and about 80% of the imports come from Canada. So basically, 25% of the lumber used to build houses and garden-style apartments would be hit by tariffs. About 45% of the copper used in the United States is imported, and about 25% of that comes from Canada. About 21% of the steel used in the United States is imported. 17% of that comes from Canada, 14% comes from China, and 13% comes from Mexico. And about 24% of the cement used in the United States is imported, 24% of that coming from Canada, and another 10% coming from Mexico. So, in a nutshell, the proposed tariffs would drive up the construction costs on multifamily projects by about 7.5%. Multifamily housing construction is already slowing, with the total number of units under construction down by 41% compared to the peak set in 2023. So, when a 7.5% bump in material costs is combined with rising labor costs, rising debt capital costs, and other construction headwinds, it could drive housing construction down even more. Now, for existing multifamily owners, adding even more headwinds on new housing supply would put downward pressure on vacancy rates, leading to rising rents. So while tariffs themselves will have little direct effect on most types of commercial real estate, the indirect impact is more significant. Increased construction costs, a slowing economy, higher inflation, and higher interest rates would all weigh on the sector. So even though Canada and Mexico have pushed back the timeline on the implementation of tariffs, this conversation isn't done. And that means this whole topic will be surrounded by uncertainty for the next month or longer. Tariffs are one of the news items every investor will want to monitor as they keep their eyes on the horizon.